Welcome to the fascinating world of birds. Before we begin our segment today, we just want to say a huge thank you to you, our viewers at home, for your continuous positive remarks, support, comments and questions. We appreciate it so much and can't wait to hear what you have to say. Today, I am joined with Chanith Wijeratna, who will explain to us another bird species. Welcome, Chanith.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Chanith, which interesting bird species will you be talking to us today?
Well, today I'll be talking to you about the Australasian gannet, one of my favourite seabirds. The gannet feeds mainly on fish. It's a pale white bird with an sort of arrow-shaped body and long wings. It's got a golden wash to the head as well and a thick beak. The gannet can be seen offshore. It's a seabird, so it hunts at sea, but often they come in quite close to shore. So any place with a good vantage point of the sea is a good spot for them. A particular favourite spot for this is Cape Schanck, but Point Addis also works quite well.
Being a seabird, where is the best location that you've seen this particular bird species?
Well, there are these bird trips called pelagics that go out into the sea, and of course those obviously give really good views. But really, anywhere with a good view of the ocean, as I mentioned, is pretty good. Another spot, aside from the two I mentioned earlier, is the Nobbies from Phillip Island. It's quite rare to not see a few streaming past far out to sea. But you don't get incredible views from these spots, unless the weather is quite bad. For sea watching in general, sea watching is when you stand at a bit of land and watch the ocean for seabirds. Sea watching is best when you've had a very strong southerly wind, southerly meaning a wind that's come up from the south, for both the day of your sea watching and the day before. It's also a bit better in winter just because a few migrant seabirds are more obvious then. Now, as you can imagine, a strong wind blowing into your face does not make for a very good experience.
Not at all.
I wouldn't recommend sea watching over one of those pelagic boat trips unless you're quite a serious bird watcher, or you just really want to see an albatross, which is quite consistent from sea watching if you go at the right time of the year at the right weather.
I see. And what are some of the behavioural patterns that these birds exhibit that our bird watchers at home can identify?
Well, one of the things that I really like about the gannet is how it feeds. As I mentioned, gannets feed on fish. But to do this, they dive bomb a school of fish from the air. They've got reinforced skulls so that they don't burst their brains open when they do this.
And I imagine these birds would be diving at very fast speeds.
Exactly, and from quite high up as well. They feed in flocks too, and they'll sort of swarm whenever they see fish near the surface. So you'll often from shore see a sort of massive mess of gannets sort of just smashing their way into the water.
I haven't seen this in real life, but I can imagine that it would be amazing for even photographers who are keen on pursuing nature photography.
Yes, it's a great sight, although just because of the inherent distance in seeing a seabird from land, it can be a bit tricky to get a photo that's not awful. The best way to photograph gannets is to go to one of their breeding colonies. There's one in the middle of Port Phillip Bay called Pope's Eye, and there's one in Portland called Point Danger.
Lovely.
Now, Point Danger is also notable because I've been talking about the Australasian gannet so far, but there are other species of gannets, and the one relevant to this story is the Cape gannet in South Africa. Now, at Point Danger, the colony is Australasian gannets, but we're not really sure quite why, but most years, one or two Cape gannets just randomly turn up there, and it's the only place in Australia where Cape gannet can be observed with any consistency.
So it would be classified as a rare bird sighting?
Yes, it's what's called a vagrant, which is when a bird ends up somewhere where it's not expected to be. Now, I went down last year to get my first Cape gannet there, and I can recommend the experience thoroughly. To get to Point Danger, it is quite a drive, but once you're there, at certain times of the day, a volunteer will open up a sort of viewing area for the colony, and you can get reasonably close without disturbing the birds. I was very lucky when I was there, and the Cape gannet was right at the front, so I got incredible views.
That's absolutely remarkable, Chanith. With that, it brings us to the end of today's segment. Thank you yet again for joining with us and explaining to us your valuable insights and information to our viewers.
Thank you for having me again.
Join us again on our next segment where we'll be discussing birdwatching. Thank you.